everybody see what's on my screen?
Yes.
Yes, okay, all right, thank you. By the way, I do see we have some Lone Star faculty here. So Professor Michael Kohler is here too. And by the way, guys, so I have a cold. My voice doesn't normally sound like this, but I got a cold from my kid. So I have a 7-year-old and 3-year-old. Didn't bring back all the germs from the school. But I think this cold is good, right? Because it does give me a deeper, sexier voice. So hopefully you guys can enjoy this. All right, so the topic for today, we're going to talk about the tariff. We're going to talk about the reciprocal tariff of 2025. But before we talk about what has been happening in the economy, let's go over some definitions first. So what is a tariff? So in economics, a tariff is a tax. It's a tax on import or export. Most of the tariff we hear in the economy are all tax on import. So we put a tax on import, and therefore somebody gonna pay for this tariff to the government. Now the consensus among the economists, so if you ask most economists, I would say 98% of them will agree that tariffs are bad for the economy because it does create more inefficiency in the economy, and then most likely buyers are the one who pay for the tariff. Import is something we produce from other countries. We buy them in America. So think about everything we buy from Walmart. Those are all imported from China, from Vietnam. That's an import. So somebody else made it, and we have them in America. Export is the other way around. It's something we made in America, but we're gonna sell to other countries. So think about some major export of U.S. economy. Our biggest export is actually stuff like a corn, soybeans, natural gas. So those are the major export of U.S. economy.
Okay,
Um,
thank you.
no problem. So, so most economists agree that tariffs are bad. And if you notice that on there, I put one person's name on there. So Ron Vara. If you guys interested, you can Google him. So Ron Vara is the only economist who really public said that tariff is good. But Ron Vara is not a real person. So if you guys interested, see who that is, and then they'll give you some more perspective on this whole tariff argument. All right, so tariff has been a major part of US history. Think about the Boston Tea Party. That was a tariff, right? Because in 1773, our forefathers went to the harbor of Boston. We threw away all the tea into the harbor, and we famously proclaimed no taxation without representation. That taxation, that was a tariff on the teas from China. So our forefathers were protesting against the teas from China, against the tariff on the teas from China. Um, by the way, that picture you see on there, that's not a picture by William Cooper from 1799. Because if you look closely, you can still see the Boston skyscrapers in the back. So that's a AI generating image. So the real image is this one. That's the real image from William Cooper. But this image here, this AI generated image, this is actually very important for our talk. We're going to come back to it at the end of the presentation. Okay, so all right, so there are some commonalities between what we see now, the tariff proposed by President Trump, and also the Boston Tea Party. They were both trying to put a tariff on the tax or on the import from China. Um, but if you think about some of our very famous forefathers, like this guy here, right? Samuel Adams, the leader of Some Liberty, who was on the forefront to protest against the tariff from China, tariff on tea from China. And by the way, if this name sounds familiar to you, you're right. This is the same Samuel Adams you hear on the beer. So imagine you're Samuel Adam and you are looking at what is happening now, right? So you are fighting so hard to found this country, and then 200 some years later, our government tried to impose more tariff on import coming to America. But later I'm going to talk about the rationale. So why? What is the reason why? What is the rationale that our new Trump's administration tried to put a tariff on all the imported good? Another important episode of tariff on U.S. history, tariff also played a very important part in during the Great Depression. So if you look at the Smoot-Hawley tariff in 1930s, there were two major stock crash happening in the market. One on 1929. On that day, the Smoot-Hawley tariff was in debate in the US Senate. And then nine of the senators who were initially against the Smoot-Hawley tariff switched their position. So that switch caused the market to crash by almost 20%. And another one, when the Smoot-Hawley tariff was passed in 1930, you saw another tariff, you saw another crash in the market. So if you look at what has been happening in the during the Great Depression, 1929, the economy crashed. 1930, the economy got even worse. And then every year since then, the economy is getting worse and worse and worse and worse. So many economists says that the small Hawley tariff, which was put in place, try to protect our U.S. industry, didn't do the job. Actually made the economy worse off. And if you guys, anybody here who is interested to know why that happened, really because a lot of what happened was that once the U.S. put a tariff on all the imported goods, other country retaliated. So right away, within 2 years, from 1930 to 1932, the global trade went down by 90%. So that really made this depression not just a U.S. phenomenon, but made it into a global phenomenon. So many economies were suffering because of this decrease in trade. All right, but let's look at what did President Trump did in his first presidency, so in the 2016. So 2018, we put in the first tariff by President Trump. But that tariff was on a smaller scale. And then I will argue that first round of tariff in 2016, 2018, that was a more managed tariff because we targeted specifically the things we want to tax. So for example, we put a tariff on between 30 to 50% on solar panels and washing machines from China. And if you guys remember, back in 2019, there was a huge rush on the market. Everybody was all rushing to Costco, Best Buy, buying the washing machine, because the tariff was about to put on the washing machines. We also put a 25% tariff on steel, 10% on aluminum, and also 25% on $50 billion of Chinese import. So the tariff war started in first term for President Trump, but and then COVID kicked in, so they really put everything on pause. But one thing, let's talk about this tariff on the solar panel. That idea is great because solar panel is a no, we want to bring back more manufacturers in America. Because if you look at what has been happening in the US economy since 1970s, there's been a decline of US manufacturers. They want to bring back those manufacturers to America. And then this new industry to produce solar panels with very high paying job, with very high skilled labor, it require a lot of technologies. We want to have those type of job come to America. So by having this tariff to place on all the imported tariff solar panels from China, we can make those Chinese produced solar panels more expensive, and therefore the US produced solar panels are more competitive. Because otherwise, with no tariff, the Chinese won't be too cheap, US one too expensive, and the consumer naturally will buy the Chinese solar panels. So we put a tariff on it, and the idea was great. But right away, within the first year, we hear a lot of protest. So many people start protesting against the solar panel tariff. And surprisingly, it wasn't the consumer who protested, but it was the US companies who does all the installations of solar panel start protesting. Because once you put a 30 to 50% tariff on all the Chinese solar panels, that means the Chinese one are more expensive now, but that didn't make the US one cheaper. So consumers now are facing with the higher prices on the solar panels they have to choose from. And before the tariff, they had a cheaper option. But now with the tariff, there's no more cheaper option now. So many consumers decided not to buy the solar panels. So that's why the solar panel installers, they're the one who start complaining about a tariff on the solar panels. So sometimes what we see is that we might have a great idea of how to help the US economy, help the US industries, but every time you put any policies on tariff, on import export, you are always creating winners and losers. So the winners from the solar panel tariff is the US company who produce solar panels, but they're a very small part of the industry. The losers, they're the consumers and other business who is also involved try to service this industry. So that's why, for us, a government, we sometimes we do have to make a choice. Really, who do we want to piss off now? Now, another one about the 25% tariff on the aluminum, on the steel. So there was a study released back in 2020. So this tariff, 25% tariff on the US steel has made the foreign steel more expensive, US steel relatively cheaper now. So there's been an increase of jobs in the US steel industry. But we also use many of the tariff revenue pumped into the US steel industries. So many steel companies receiving subsidies, grant, loans at a 0% interest rate from the US government. In 2017, that total cost to taxpayer was $94 billion. But in the process, we saved or we supported over 358,000 jobs in America. Now that sounds great, but if you break the number down on an annual basis, so if you divided this $94 billion by 356,000 jobs we saved, each job cost the taxpayer $250,000 per year. And also, if you factor in all the actual cost the consumer had to pay for, because with a tariff on the steel, that means everything produced with the steel in the market is more expensive now, so consumer must pay higher prices. So if you factor in all the higher costs for consumers, consumers are paying about almost $1 million per job saved in America. So we save a lot of jobs. That was great for the US steel industry, but overall, it's bad for the taxpayer, and overall, it's bad for the consumers. Okay. All right. So the new tariff. So what do we have now? So this is still accurate. So I last checked this before the meeting. So this is still accurate now. So we have a 145% tariff, everything from China. Currently, we have a 25% tariff on steel, aluminum, and cars. And then starting from May 3rd, so a couple of days ago, we now have a 25% tariff on the car parts. Also 25% tariff from Canada and Mexico. That's everything not covered by the USMCA. By the way, the USMCA, that is the new NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. And lastly, 10% tariff on all other import. So let's talk about this 25% import tariff on cars. Um, for many car companies, this is a very bad news because imagine, let's suppose I am BMW, and then normally my car is produced in Germany. But now US government says we're going to put a 25% tariff on all the new cars coming from Germany. So from the BMW perspective, who's going to pay for this? Now, in a normal economic situation, it's the consumer who's going to pay for it. So imagine for all the BMW going to buy, there will be a price increase of maybe from 15 to 20%. But the companies are reluctant to pass on these higher prices to the consumers because they don't want the consumer to go to other brand. Because imagine if you're Ford and GM, which might be close, which might be produced in America, they don't have the 25% tariff on it. So BMW doesn't want to push consumers to Ford and GM because they have to pass on the tariff to the consumers. But one thing about this tariff, it is always paid by the consumers. And let me give you guys an example. So something I experienced personally. So back in 2016, when President Trump was running for office for the first time, and then he said, we're going to put a war between US and Mexico. Now, when I heard that, start thinking, that's not going to work. I mean, I'm from China, right? So we have a war from China, a big war in China, and we call that what the Great War, right? So, did it work? No, because we're still getting invaded by the Mongolians all the time. So, but Trump says we're going to put a war between U.S. and China, US and Mexico, and then President Trump says we're going to make sure that Mexico pay for it. But then he become president, and Mexico says we're not paying for this. That's your war on your land. You pay for it. And then President Trump says, fine, you don't pay for it. We're going to put a 25% tariff on everything coming from Mexico. So that tariff on Mexico was proposed during the first 6 months of President Trump's first presidency. Um, that that tariff, because we're buying a lot of avocado from Mexico at the time, so that was also nicknamed as the avocado tariff. By the way, do you guys like avocados from Mexico? Guys, use the chat box. Type in yes or no. Type in
Yes.
yes or no. Yes, Brenda, yes. So type in yes or no. Tell me, let me know if you have a preference on which country you buy your avocado from. Yeah, Diana says yes. Um, yeah, personally, I only buy my avocado from Mexico. So whenever I go to HEB or Walmart buy the avocado, first thing I do, I look at the sticker. If it's from Mexico, I buy it. But if it's from California, I wouldn't buy them anymore. Because the one from California tend to be smaller with a bigger seed. But the one from Mexico, it tend to be bigger with a smaller seed. So I love my Mexican avocado. Now, also think about, how you choose your avocado, right? So you go to your HEB, you look at the different avocados they put in the bin, right? So you pick the one you want, and then you squeeze a little bit, right, to see the softness, right? So if it's soft enough, I'll buy it. But if it's too hard, I wouldn't buy this anymore. In 2019, when I was in China visiting my family, I saw they were selling Mexican avocado at a local Walmart in China. But here's the difference. I couldn't pick the avocado up to squeeze it because the avocados sold at the Walmart in China, they were packaged very nicely too in a gift box. So you couldn't even touch it. So those two avocados in China in 2019, they were sold for about $10 per box. So $10 for two avocado from Mexico. Now it is more expensive because really the shipping cost is more expensive. So that's why those avocados are more expensive in China. But in China, people love those Mexican avocados. So imagine if you are a farmer in Mexico and you produce the avocado, you have a choice. You can send it to America, you can sell to China. So if America says, hey, farmer in Mexico, we're going to put a 25% tax on everything you sell. So what would the farmer do in Mexico? They would turn around, sell to China instead. So we couldn't buy our avocados anymore. So the only way for our consumer to buy the avocado from Mexico is that for the farmer in Mexico to pass on this tariff to the consumers in America. So whatever price he charged before, it will just increase by 25%. And he will use that extra revenue to pay for the tariff. Right? So that's why tariff most likely will be passed on to the consumers. That's why consumer tend to end up paying the tariff for it. Now let's go back to our car industry. So this 25% tariff on cars is very bad for many of the car companies. So here's the companies in the news. Um, Nissan Infiniti announced on April 3rd they're going to stop importing new cars to America. VW Audi announced on April 7th stop importing to America. Range Rover April 8th and then Mitsubishi April 14th. So all these cars announced that they're going to stop importing cars to America because this tariff might make it more expensive. But recently on the April 14th, our President Trump says we're going to put a pause on those tariff on cars. So those tariffs might not be in place. So right now we're still okay. Um, so I know we have a lot of parents here. Um, can everybody use the chat? Type in yes or no if your kids or if your children are gamers, they love to play games. So type in yes or no if your kids love to play games. I say, oh yes. So my 7-year-old like to play Minecraft. My 3-year-old love to play Mario, Super Mario. So they have been bugging me to buy them the new Nintendo Switch 2. So the Switch 2 was supposed to be announced or released in April, but Nintendo decided to delay that launch until June 5th. And the reason why the delay was in place, by the way, all those Nintendo Switch are already produced. They're ready. They're ready to be sold to the consumers. But the reason why the company decided to delay that release because those Nintendos are made in China. So if the Nintendo bring the Switch to America now, they're gonna put a tariff on it. So now since President Trump says recently we're gonna put a pause on all the electronics and phones and computers from China, so that is also under the exemption. So that's why company changed tone says we're gonna delay our release to June 5th. So June 5th, we can now go buy our Nintendo Switch from Best Buy or Walmart everywhere else. So another thing you guys might heard that U.S. Hong Kong has decided to stop sending mails or post service to America. Now, normally we're thinking, hey, I'm not buying anything from Hong Kong, right? So what do I buy from Hong Kong? Well, you'd be surprised because there are two major company who use Hong Kong as a source to sending posts mails to America. And those companies are these ones. Temu and Shein. So if you're buying anything from Temu and Shein, most likely they're coming from China through Hong Kong. And also this happened, I think yesterday. Temu just announced that because there's a new tariff on everything from China, so Temu gonna stop sending stuff from China to America. They're gonna have a more local sourcing, local warehouse. But even with a local warehouse, that company is still subject to the tariff. Okay, so what you buy from Temu and Shein, they might be more expensive now. A couple things happened. So normally when there's a tariff placed on companies, especially on import, consumers normally would see the price increase right away. Couple reasons. Because many companies, and then Brenda probably know this, so for the supply chain, there's something called a just-in-time delivery, right? So companies don't keep too much inventory on hand because all those inventories is capturing their excess capital. They couldn't use that for cash flow. So company like to use just-in-time delivery. But with all this tariff that was recently announced, the price hasn't changed that much in America. Because what happened was that back in November, when President Trump was elected, many companies changed their strategy to anticipate this tariff that was coming. So this new term is called a front loading. So front loading is when companies buying up excess inventories ahead of the sale because they're expecting the tariff is coming. So before the tariff is put in place, we're going to buy stuff first before the tariff coming. So still pay the lower prices. But the problem is, so even though we haven't seen the new higher prices, um, many companies' inventory is about 60 days to 90 days of inventory. So maybe they're gonna run out soon. So very soon, maybe in the next couple months, we might see higher prices from the stuff we buy. Also something changed too. If you look at the import from other countries to America, so this is the import from Vietnam to America from 2015 to 2025. So for the last 10 years, US import from Vietnam has increased by 369%. Import from Cambodia increased by 402%. And the import from Thailand over 237%. And the import from Malaysia is over 162%. And reason why the import from those countries increased by so much, because a big part of it is that back in 2016, 2017, when President Trump started the first trade war with China, many companies in China decide to relocate their manufacturers away from China to those countries instead. So we still have import, just not from China anymore. And then if you look at, let me show you guys a map. Let me show you a map from Vietnam. All right, so this is a port city in Vietnam. It's called Haiphong. So this port city, if you look at the map here, China, so this is the border. So China is right here. So Haiphong is really close to China. If you zoom into Haiphong, let me show you what they have now. So let's look at something they have in Haiphong. And you guys are going to be surprised. Um, do you see what this is? Shipping containers, right? More shipping containers. Shipping containers. Let's go a little further. More shipping containers. More shipping containers. And then there needs so much more shipping from this new city now. More shipping containers. They just opened a new seaport in Haiphong. Let me show you where it is. So the new seaport is right, I believe it's right here. There. This is a new seaport in Haiphong, and you have all the shipping containers here. So the seaport in Vietnam cannot expand fast enough because all those manufacturers that used to be in China, they're now moving to country like Vietnam. So when we put a tariff on China, it's not as effective as it used to be because now many of those Chinese manufacturers are now have moved to other countries now. Okay. All right. So let me show you some numbers. You guys probably seen this before. So this was the tariff rate that President Trump announced on the Liberation Date on April 2nd. And again, on top of the list is China. So we decided to put a 34% additional tariff on China. And then you have country like Vietnam was 46%. You have Japan's 24%, and then you have other countries like 10%. But if you look at the entire list, let me show you a place. It's a little small to see. But right here, there is an island called Heard and McDonald Island, and there's a 10% tariff on it. And if you look at where the Heard and McDonald Island is, so by the way, the map's a little incomplete. The Heard and McDonald Island is right here, little to the east of Australia. That island has a population of zero. Nobody lived there. So what is there? Penguins and seals. And we'll put a 10% tariff on it. Now, when this was first announced, many comedians made fun of President Trump's policies as, hey, what are we doing here? Why are we taxing, why we put a tariff on seals and penguins? But the idea was that we try to close any loophole. Because there are companies who try to move their stuff to McDonald Island first, and then if there's a 0% tariff, they will send the stuff from McDonald to America at a 0% tariff. So to close the loophole, that's why we put a tariff on the Heard and McDonald Island. And then there's also some Christmas Island, also 10% as well. That's another small island in the Pacific Ocean. We don't buy much from them, but just in case there's a loophole. Okay, so but one thing I do want to point out is that the calculation. Now, on the top of the chart, it says tariff charge to the US, including currency manipulation and then trade barrier. Now, as the econ professor, and also as a person from China, I love numbers. So whenever I hear this, I say, hey, my mind start running. So what is this equation that the White House is looking at? So this equation, by the way, the this is tau. So tau stands for tariff. So this tariff is probably a function of purchasing power parity. And by the way, what that means, if, for example, in China, sometimes Chinese government would try to make their currency artificially cheaper, so their export more competitive. So that's called a purchasing power parity. And then this probably also going to measure the real exchange rate, real interest rate, maybe another formula for the trade barrier. And then so I start thinking again, so what do these formulas? Yes, Brenda.
Just wanted to point out one thing. The reason why this formula is important for us to figure out how exactly this was calculated
Uh-huh.
is because when people saw the term reciprocal tariffs, they were like, oh, so China is, or any other country, they're charging this amount of tariffs for US products to be imported to their country. So what the US decided to do is just charge them half. And
Hmm.
that's actually not exactly what happened. This formula is more complicated than those numbers. And so that's why it's important to really emphasize what
Yeah,
actually happened.
right. So that's what the formula looks like in economics. And then a couple days later, the White House released their own formula. So this is the actual formula how the numbers were determined. So X stand for export, M is import. Epsilon, that stands for the price elasticity of import demand. So that really measures how likely will consumer change behavior whenever price changes. And then the phi is the elasticity of import prices, which is with respect to tariff. So this one measures how likely the actual market price would change whenever tariff change, and then multiply by the import again. And also in the document released by White House, we have decided the epsilon is 4 and then phi is 0.25. So if you do 4 times 0.25, this is equal to 1. So this actually cancel out. So the real formula that the White House used is actually way more simpler. It's just equal to the trade deficit divided by the import we have from the country. Now, trade deficit means that if you buy too much from the other countries, that they don't buy enough from us, that's a trade deficit. So if you use the real numbers you produced by the White House, so these numbers are in the billions. So in 2023, China, so our export to China was $143.5 billion. That's a lot of export, right? So mostly farm product, a lot of oil and gas product too. But our import from China was at $438 billion. So our trade deficit was $295 billion, and divided by the import of 438, that's exactly 67% or 68%. And then divided by half, that's the 34% we put on China, right? So that's where number comes from. It's a very, very simple calculation. But let me talk about why this rationale is false from the economic perspective. Um, Trade deficit is not always bad. That sometimes trade deficit is good. And then every country, with their trading partners, we all have some countries we're running a trade deficit with. It's just the natural of trade. And then even for our individual consumers, we run a trade deficit too. Because trust me, we all have a trade deficit with HEB, right? So think about every week when you go to HEB buy your groceries. That's your trade deficit. We're buying all the stuff from HEB, but HEB doesn't buy anything from me. So I run a trade deficit with HEB. So do I say, hey, HEB, you are ripping me off? No, give me lower prices. I'll buy more stuff from you, right? So many of this trade here, we run a trade deficit. It's just the nature of the economy. It's just that they have something we want and we don't have enough they want. And it just happened to be a trade deficit. And by the way, another thing that China buys a lot from America, they purchase a lot of Boeing airplane. Remember all those planes we have that keep falling from the sky? They buy from us too, right? So that's our trade deficit. Um, let's talk about what happened on April 9th. So April 9th, by the way, this was I think it was Wednesday. So Wednesday I was still in class, and then the stock market went through a huge change. So right away the Dow Jones jumped from 37,000 points to 40,000 points. So within 20 minutes, Dow Jones increased by over 3,000 points. So what happened was that President Trump, um, in his um, um, in his social media post, announced we're going to put a 90-day pause on the tariff we just saw, except China. So everybody else on the list, those tariffs, we're going to have a 90-day pause on it, but China's tariff going into effect right away. Couple things happened. So President Trump says, that we had to make the change because some people were really too, what was the term he used? Too jumpy on the market. The market was behaving not rationally. But two things happened on that day earlier. So first, um, we're about to get into a trade war with Europe. Because on that one day, on April 9 in the morning, European Union also announced they're going to put a retaliatory tariff on all the US import. So when we're about to put a tariff on import from Europe, Europe is about to do the same thing for us. So that was the start of a trade war with Europe. And also something else changed in the US treasury market. So treasury market, that's how our US government borrow money. So think about all those US government debt. That treasury market normally is a safe harbor investment. So whenever there's a market crash, consumer investors will buy US treasury stocks, right? So because doing so, the it's a safe investment. We always pay the money back on time. But when we announced the new tariff, notice this new jump in the treasury rate. So what was happening was that many investors decided to dump US treasury stocks because they were losing trust, losing faith in our US government. Now, for this increase in interest rate, it's a very bad sign for the US government. Because remember, every year or so we had to pass a new budget. And then if we don't, we have a government shutting down. With a higher interest rate, we need a higher budget to pay for our interest on the debt. Now, US, for all the $37 trillion we borrow, we never pay the money back, but we only pay the interest on the debt. And that's part of our annual budget. So at a higher interest rate, that means our budget need to increase to pay for the higher interest on the debt. So So those are very bad signs for the US economy. That's why, I really think these two reasons was the reason why President Trump decided to put a pause on the tariff on Europe and also other countries too. Um, all right, so let's this one I talked about it before. So Bangladesh. Um, I still have a lot of families in China. So every year, every time I go visiting my family in China, I want to buy stuff for them, right? So for everybody here who have family overseas, you probably do the same thing, right? Buy some gift for your families. But I remember in the early 2000s, it was very difficult for me to buy stuff for my family in China because everything in the store here was made in China. Can you imagine if I buy my family a gift from America that's made in China? That's horrible, right? So back then that was difficult for me to buy stuff from America. But for the last 10 years or so, it's becoming easier now. Because if you look at the shirts we have, the jeans we wear, the shoes we have, they're not just made in China anymore. There are also other countries also making shirts, jeans, shoes for us. Some of the countries, have Vietnam, Cambodia, but this country here called Bangladesh. Bangladesh is becoming one of the biggest exporter of textile industries. They're exporting some of the most jeans and shoes to the market. In 2023, the Bangladesh government increased the minimum wage in the textile industry. Before the increase, it was 8,000 taka per month, which is about $35. And then with the increase, it become $113 or 12,500 taka per month for the employees in the textile industries. Now, the standard working week in the textile industry is 48 hours. That's the normal working load. So 8 hours per day for 6 days a week. But sometimes during peak season, those workers work up to 72 hours a week. Now, here's my question for you. So this is something that we can think about. The reason why we allow countries like Bangladesh to make shoes and jeans and shirts for us is simply because they have a lower cost of labor. And their labor is so low, our workers cannot compete. Because back in 1970s, US, we had the biggest textile industry in the world. We made the most shoes, jeans, shirts in the world. And then our jeans were so good in 1980s when the economy of Japan was booming, the consumers in Japan would pay top dollar for a pair of used jeans that was made in America. That's how good our stuff were. But we don't produce them anymore because our other countries have a lower cost of labor. And their cost of labor is so cheap, there's no way our workers can compete against that. So let's think about this, right? Is this the kind of jobs we want to bring back to America? Maybe not, right? So now, of course, I want to have the solar panels made in America. I want to have the cars made in America. But for stuff like shirts and jeans and shoes, and maybe some other labor-intensive, low-skill jobs, let the other country deal with that. Let them handle it. Let them produce at a lower cost for us. Because one thing I promise you guys this, if you look at, so if you guys just look at what you have in your closet, you have more stuff in your closet than what your parents had when they were at your age. So our consumers were benefiting tremendously with this. We're able to buy more stuff cheaper. But again, at a cost of the US textile industry. So those companies who used to make shirts and jeans and shoes in America, they don't make shirts, jeans, and shoes in America anymore. But normally you're thinking, hey, that means those companies are doing bad right now, right? Because they don't make stuff anymore. But those companies are doing better than ever before. Think about a pair of Nike shoes. Now, again, my 7-year-old, he want to buy a pair of Air Jordan. I never thought about how expensive those shoes are until we went to the store. So the Air Jordan he want to buy is $100 for a 7-year-old. Now, for that $100 pair of shoes, do you really think that the workers in Bangladesh, in Vietnam, is getting paid $20 per hour? No, they're getting paid almost nothing, right? So the cost of manufacturing for their shoes is very, very low. So who else is benefiting with all this import of cheap import? Is the company who does all the import. So Nike today is not a manufacturing company anymore. Nike is a designing company. They design all the shoes. Same thing with Apple. Apple is not a company produce all the iPhones. Apple don't make iPhones. Apple design all the iPhones. It's the company in China. This company called a Foxconn. Foxconn manufacture all the iPhones in China. So so our companies, they're still able to enjoy a bigger profit because their cost is much lower. But one thing that is a problem is that the jobs that used to be in America is not here anymore. They are now in other countries. So if you look at most entry-level econ textbook, and I tell this to my students, so if you look at the textbook always says import is not bad, right? Because there's no evidence that import actually increase unemployment rate. Because it's true. If you look at the unemployment rate in America for the last 40 years has been pretty steady. And right now, especially now, we're doing great, right? So our unemployment today is only like 4%. But if you look at our import has increased in the last 40 years by fourfold. So import went up, but unemployment rate stayed very steadily. And the reason why, because that our economy, like most economies in the world, we can always self-adjust. Whenever we lose a job in one industry, there are other jobs in different industries pop up, can absorb those excess of labor. That's why the unemployment rate doesn't change. But one thing that does run very closely with the increase in import is our income inequality. So as the more and more import we have in America, our income inequality also increased as well because we're losing good paying middle class manufacturing jobs. We're replacing them with low paying service jobs. So really, I don't agree with everything President Trump does, but this rationale of his, put a tariff on everything from other countries, try to bring back more jobs to America, I agree with that. We should have more jobs in America, the good paying manufacturing jobs in America. But there is a problem. Um, Let me show you something. There's a new term in manufacture. It's called a dark factory or a light off factory because they see the picture here. And then if you guys think about what you learn in your history book, right? So Ford was famous for Model T. Because that was the very first assembly line we produced, try to produce cars. So we train workers to do just one thing, and the workers become very effective, very efficient, can produce more car than ever before. But if you look at a new assembly line for cars, you don't see people anymore. So by the way, this is a picture of the Tesla factory. You don't see any employees on the floor anymore. It's actually very dangerous for an employee to be on the floor because this floor is occupied by all the robotic arms. So if you look at the manufacturers in America, for the last 10 years, 15 years, the the production for manufacturer has increased in America, but the number of jobs in the manufacturing industry has been decreasing because companies are producing more stuff. They just don't need people anymore. So remember that picture I showed you from the very beginning, the AI picture? With more AI, with more robotics, we're going to bring those production back to America, but the jobs might not come back to America anymore, right? So, all right, but let's close this on some good note, right? So, with all this tariff going on, what do we do? So Brenda, don't worry. Porsche right now have a tariff-free inventory. You
I
can buy
was
a
very
Porsche.
concerned about.
But there's something else I want to show. I want you guys to look at it. See at the very bottom says, we are purchasing vehicles of all makes and models, make selling your vehicle a easy, stress-free experiences. The reason why Ford and many other dealerships try to buy more cars from us now is because they're not ready to sell new cars right now. Because all those new cars with a tariff on it, they don't know what the price will be. So to make their business easier, they are now buying used cars from consumers and try to resell them at a more reasonable price. Um, so something else is coming up. Um, so July 4th is coming up. We should get ready for it. But here's what you're looking for, what you can look forward to. Um, China produced 98% of all the fireworks in America. So all those fireworks stand you see on the high side of highways, with the 140% tariff on everything from China, those fireworks will be more expensive. And then you know what's even worse? China also makes all the US flags. So even the flags we fly will be more expensive too. Okay. All right. So that's what I have for everybody. So hopefully you guys find this interesting. Any questions for me?
If you have any questions, you can put them on the chat.
Or if it's easier, you can also unmute yourself, right? So
Okay, yeah.
I'll
same
ask
thing.
you a question.
Yes.
So moving forward, as an economist, whether you want to look at past historical trends, administrations, previous policies, when you look forward, whether it's the next 4 years, 5 years, what do you anticipate? What are some of the signals that you're anticipating from those predictions? Can we expect inflation? Can we expect supply chain issues? What are your thoughts, sir?
Yeah. So that's a scary topic to think about, right? Because I know that for many business leaders here, this is also on your mind too, right? So what can we expect? Not even just 3 to 5 years, the next 6 months is a problem, right? So because for many business, especially doing import export, you build up your supply chain 10, 15, 20 years, and you have a very trusting relationship with a supplier. So now you put a tariff on everything from China, it's very difficult for those companies to find a new supplier from other countries. One thing I didn't show, actually, let me go back. Let me show you guys something. So this happened to me a couple days ago. So a couple days ago, my garden hose was broken, and I want to buy another one from Amazon. So I went to Amazon. I look at my old purchase history, and I saw this garden hose. And then this is 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, that garden hose was unavailable. They sold out. But this was the best seller in Amazon. They sold out. They don't sell it anymore. I just checked this today, this morning. So you look at Amazon now, it's back in stock now. So yeah, I'm happy. Um, oh my God, no. No, it's unavailable. I just checked this morning. This morning was still available, but now it's unavailable. So they sold out because companies they're running low on the inventory. They don't have enough supply for us. Really, like even just a couple hours when I was making the change to my PowerPoint, I paste this. So 2 hours ago, when I pasted this from the website, it was still available, but it said it will deliver on Wednesday, May 14th, because it wasn't sold by Amazon anymore. It was sold by the private company. So Amazon is very quickly running out of inventories. So for companies who are doing long-term planning, um, one thing that I want to talk about, one more thing I want to mention, is Foxconn. So let me type in the name. So you guys might have heard this before. Uh, Foxconn. So Foxconn is a huge manufacturer of electronics in China. They produce all the Apple product. They also produce all the Microsoft product. So imagine the same company will make the Xbox, PS5, and also iPhones in China. This company's manufacturing plant was was only in China for many years. But recently, this company also opened up new plant in India and Vietnam. So company like Foxconn, they're also looking at this whole trade war with China as a liability. So to diminish their own exposure to trade in China, they're now moving away the production away from China to other locations. But as a business owner, that shouldn't be the decision you're based on. You should make your decision based on the quality of manufacture, the cost of production, but not based on what is the policy of tariff from any administration, right? So all this tariff we have imposed on different import is definitely causing more headaches among the business industries. And another thing is that with this tariff, for sure, we're going to see higher prices because companies are moving away from the lowest source of production to the next cheapest source of production, right? So it's still cheap, but it's getting a little more expensive now, right? So those higher prices will be passed on to consumers.
We have a question. As we look in 6 months, do we anticipate food shortage due to a lack of subsidies that may not have been given to farmers?
That's a scary thought, right? So, if I'm a farmer in US today, I'll be very worried. Because here's the difference between the first term for President Trump and the second term. Back in 2017, 2018, when we imposed a tariff on China, China also retaliated, put a tariff on America. So because we're exporting a lot of corn and soybean to China, our farmers all of a sudden lost their source of export. They don't have customers anymore. So many farmers lost a lot of money. But back in 2018, US government actually provided a lot of funding, a lot of help to the farmers. So like a aid to farmers, extra grant to farmers. But today, that actual help hasn't kicked in yet. Now, I'm really hoping the actual help will kick in soon, because for many farmers, right now, it's a very important time because right now is the planting season, right? So if you don't plant now, you're not having any harvest. So without a government help, for a farmer who try to plan ahead, let's Veronica says, in 6 months, so if I produce my corn, if I plant the corn 6 months later, when I have the corn, who do I sell this to? So without knowing the for a certain answer, many farmers just says, "Hey, I'm not ready to produce now. I don't want to sell now. I don't want to plant now because I don't know what's happening in 6 months." So would that be a food shortage? Um, Probably not. Because one thing we can do, we can also import food from other country. So thinking about a country like Brazil, Brazil is actually one of the biggest exporter of corn and soybean in the global economy. But Brazil wasn't that. Back in 2015, Brazil wasn't the biggest exporter of corn and soybean. But US government, we made Brazil to be the biggest exporter of corn and soybean. Because when we started a war with China, China says, fine, we're not buying from America anymore. Who do we buy from? Brazil. So, so if you're Brazil, you love this war between US and China. Because the more tariff we have, the more that China will buy from Brazil. So we have a question from Christina. So the result isn't more sales for US companies or farmers, but for other countries instead. Now, let's talk about the companies first. If you're a small mom and pop shop in US who does only sales in America, this is good, right? Because last couple weeks, I saw there was an interview of a shrimping company in Louisiana. They love the tariff. Because when they put a tariff on all the shrimps coming from Thailand, coming from Vietnam, that means those New Orleans shrimps, Louisiana shrimps, they're relatively cheaper now. And also there was another story about a company in Texas make all the cowboy hat. Those are all made in Texas. They're fine. Because everything they have is all locally sourced, so they're doing okay. They love the tariff because with the tariff that made all those Chinese produced cowboy hat more expensive now, so their hat are more competitive. But if you look at the bigger companies, especially companies who have a lot of international um, integrations, um, Ford is very scared of tariff right now. So when you put a tariff on April 2nd, the stock price for Ford dropped by a lot. But Ford is a US company, right? So why would Ford be scared of tariff? Because for one, many of the Ford that's purchased in America are not made in America. So, for example, if you think about the Ford F-150, which has been the number one selling car and trucks in America, that's the quintessential American truck, F-150. But that Ford F-150, many of the parts in the Ford F-150 is actually made in Mexico. So the Toyota Tundra is actually more American than the Ford F-150 because that Tundra is most made in San Antonio, Texas. So as a company like Ford, you also worry about tariff too. And then that company also has export to other countries. So for example, if you're in China today, so one of my friends in China, a couple years ago bought a new Ford Mustang, the VA Mustang. He loved it. But with the tariff, the China also retaliated, says, hey, US, you put 145% on my stuff, I will put 125% on your stuff. So that Ford Mustang, which was made in America and sold in China, is now becoming more expensive too. So for global companies like Ford and GM, you are scared of tariff as well. Now, for farmers, of course, right? So for US farmers, our main customer, our number one customer for US farmers was China. But with all this, reciprocal tariff going on, the China is really stopped buying corn and soybean from America. Um, but for countries like Brazil, who are also exporting corn and soybean, this is their opportunity. So they are picking up the slack that's left behind by the US farmers.
And it could be also, especially for the business owners here. And this is a question specifically for the mom industry, because I know a lot of people here are from the mom industry. We know homecoming moms are, it's not a necessity, right? It's kind of a luxury product, but not luxury in the sense of like, not like a Porsche luxury. But I mean, it's a product that isn't a necessity, but it's a tradition. People love it. Um, but it isn't something that you need to eat, right? So I'm curious because if the prices go up on everything, that means that our dollars, like what the groceries that we used to get, or maybe let's even say clothes for the kids for back to school that used to cost us maybe $300, or maybe 200 or whatever, is now going to be maybe double that. So now we have less money for everything because everything costs a little bit more. Even car repairs, right? If you go back and get your car repaired and you have to buy the parts that now are going to be imported, now that car expense is even more expensive. So I'm curious, what do you know, like historically and from an economist perspective, like what does that do to industries like ours, where it isn't really a necessity? Does that tend to impact? Do people just buy less, or like what happens there?
So there's a term I want to introduce to everybody. Having the chat. It's called a dead weight loss. So dead weight loss measures the inefficiency in the market that's caused by any distortions, such as a tax or tariff. So for the mom industry, with no tariff, price is pretty reasonable. Then consumers can buy the mom, and then consumers are very happy, and then our business here can produce and supply mom, so everybody's better off. But with a tariff, that will make those mom more expensive. So consumer don't buy anymore, and therefore consumer lose their own consumer surplus or the happiness from consumption. And then company also suffers because we don't have this extra revenue and profit anymore. So everybody lost. So this scenario of everybody all losing, that is called a dead weight loss. So that is what we might see with a higher tariff and higher prices. We're gonna see more dead weight loss in the industries. So another question from iPhone. Um, Besides the mom business, what do you say about the furniture industry? Ooh, um, have you guys ever bought anything from Rooms to Go? Yeah, so for my first house 15 years ago, everything I bought for my first house was from Room to Go. And guess what? Those are not made in America. Those are actually made in China and Vietnam. So for a company like that, um, many of the furnitures are made in other countries. They're gonna be at a higher cost. So they're gonna be less competitive. But if you're a mattress mac, now what is the slogan for mattress mac? Everything all made in America, right? So if you're a mattress mac, this tariff thing is actually good for you because it's making all those imported furnitures more expensive, and our domestic produced furnitures relatively cheaper. Now this might also be good for the companies in America who are making all the furnitures because there'll be more business for them. But again, who are the winners, right? The winners will be the company who make this furnitures in America. The losers are the company who importing the furnitures, and then consumers overall, because consumers will end up paying higher prices.
For sure. Thank you, Veronica, for that. But yes, once again, thank you so much for your time, and
No
thank you all for being here. We really appreciate you, and I hope this was super informative. I know for me, I learned a lot. So thank you.
All right, bye everybody.
Bye.
Thank you again. Take care.
Bye, David.
Bye.